And she's considerably less excited about her job, less grateful, and much less happy than this woman.
She was one of the original supermodels, the face of the 1980s who graced magazine covers worldwide and married rock legend Rick Ocasek of the Cars.
Middle-aged women deal with. I mean, in my case, it was divorce and then the death of my husband.
For decades, Paulina Porizkova lived what seemed like a perfect fairy tale. Wealth, fame, a loving family, and the security that comes with marrying a millionaire musician.
You moved to New York at 15?
I moved to Paris at 15, and then I moved to New York at 17 and a half.
Then in 2018, everything collapsed. Rick died suddenly, leaving Paulina not just heartbroken, but financially destroyed. The woman who'd earned millions as a supermodel discovered she'd been cut out of her husband's will entirely. At 54, she found herself homeless, broke, and starting over from nothing. But here's what they don't tell you about Paulina Porizkova's story. Losing everything didn't break her, it freed her. The devastation that should have ended her story became the beginning of her most authentic chapter. So what really happened to Paulina Porizkova? How did a fairy tale marriage become a financial nightmare? And how did a woman in her 50s transform personal catastrophe into unexpected power? The answer reveals the hidden vulnerabilities of even the most successful women and the incredible strength it takes to rebuild your entire life when everyone thinks your best years are behind you. Origins and discovery: Czechoslovakia, 1965. Paulina Porizkova was born into a world where freedom was a luxury her family couldn't afford. Communist rule meant constant surveillance, limited opportunities, and the ever-present fear that speaking the wrong words could destroy everything. When Paulina was 3 years old, her parents made an impossible choice. They fled to Sweden seeking asylum and safety, but they could only take one child immediately. Paulina was left behind with her grandmother, promised that her parents would return for her soon. That separation lasted 7 years. The reunion at age 10 should have been joyful, but instead it was traumatic. Paulina barely remembered her parents, couldn't speak Swedish, and felt like a stranger in her own family. The little girl who'd been abandoned once was now struggling to adapt to a completely foreign culture and language. Sweden offered safety, but not belonging. Paulina was tall, awkward, and different from her Swedish classmates. Her accent marked her as an outsider, her height made her self-conscious, and her immigrant status made her feel like she didn't truly belong anywhere. She was caught between two worlds, comfortable in neither. At 15, everything changed during a trip to Paris. A modeling scout from Elite Model Management spotted her unusual beauty. The high cheekbones, the striking features that told stories of Eastern European heritage. What had made her feel different in Sweden was exactly what made her special in the fashion world. The timing was perfect, though Paulina didn't know it yet. The 1980s were about to embrace a new kind of beauty, one that celebrated exotic features and international mystique. The fashion world was ready for someone who looked like Paulina, even if she wasn't ready for the fashion world. Her first major breakthrough came with Sports Illustrated's swimsuit issue in 1984. At 19, she became the first Central European model to grace the cover, a milestone that represented more than just personal success. She was breaking barriers for an entire region of women who'd been largely invisible in Western media. The Estée Lauder contract that followed was life-changing. Multi-year deals with major cosmetics companies were the holy grail for models, providing financial security and mainstream recognition. Paulina's face would appear in department stores and magazines worldwide, making her one of the most recognizable women of the decade. But even as success mounted, Paulina understood something that many of her peers missed. Modeling careers were temporary by nature. Beauty fades, trends change, and the industry constantly seeks younger faces. She was already thinking about what would come after modeling, even as she was establishing herself as one of its biggest stars. That forward thinking would prove both prescient and ironic, as the security she thought she was building would disappear in ways she never could have imagined. Supermodel peak and rock star romance. By the mid-1980s, Paulina had achieved something remarkable. She'd transcended modeling to become a cultural icon. Her face wasn't just selling products. It was representing an entire aesthetic that defined the decade. The sharp cheekbones, the mysterious smile, the exotic beauty that had once made her feel like an outsider was now the standard everyone wanted to achieve. The Estée Lauder campaigns were revolutionary for their time. Here was a woman who looked European, sophisticated, and intellectual in an industry that had long favored all-American beauty. Paulina brought depth to fashion photography, a sense that there were stories behind her eyes that went beyond selling lipstick and perfume. Her success wasn't just about looks. Paulina spoke multiple languages, understood business, and approached her career with the strategic thinking of someone who'd learned not to take security for granted. The refugee child who'd been separated from her family understood that everything could change in an instant. But the most unexpected change came in 1984 at a party in New York. Paulina met Rick Ocasek, the lead singer of The Cars, one of the biggest rock bands of the era. The attraction was immediate and unlikely. She was 19, he was 38. She was a rising supermodel. He was an established rock star. On paper, it looked like another predictable celebrity romance. The reality was more complex and genuine. Rick was intelligent, artistic, and unlike anyone Paulina had met in the fashion world. He wasn't interested in her just because she was beautiful. He was fascinated by her mind, her experiences as an immigrant, her perspective on art and culture. For Paulina, who'd spent years being valued primarily for her appearance, this intellectual connection was revolutionary. The age gap drew criticism and speculation, but their relationship defied the cynics. When they married in 1989, it wasn't a publicity stunt or career move. It was a genuine partnership between two creative people who'd found something rare in each other. The 1990s brought a new phase of Paulina's life. Motherhood changed her priorities completely. Her sons, Jonathan and Oliver, became the center of her world in ways that magazine covers never could. She began turning down major campaigns if they required extended travel, choosing family over career opportunities that other models would have killed for. This wasn't retirement, it was evolution. Paulina continued working, but selectively, strategically. She ventured into acting with mixed results, wrote articles and essays, and gradually built a life that existed beyond the fashion industry. The Ocasek household was wealthy, creative, and stable, everything the refugee child could have dreamed of. Rick's success with the Cars, combined with smart investments and Paulina's earnings, had created genuine financial security. They owned beautiful homes, traveled extensively, and lived the kind of comfortable upper-class life that seemed permanent and unshakable. For nearly 3 decades, this life worked perfectly. Paulina successfully transitioned from supermodel to wife and mother, maintaining her identity while building something that felt more meaningful than fame. She was one of the few models who'd managed to create a sustainable life beyond the runway. But fairy tales, even real ones, don't always have the endings we expect. Devastation and reinvention. The cracks in the fairy tale began appearing slowly, so gradually that Paulina didn't recognize them as warning signs. By the 2000s, Rick had become increasingly reclusive and controlling. The creative partnership that had defined their early relationship had shifted into something more isolating. Rick's health began declining, and Paulina found herself in the role of caregiver. The man who'd once been her intellectual equal was battling depression and physical ailments that made him increasingly dependent on her care. She devoted herself to supporting him, putting her own needs aside in ways that would have consequences she couldn't foresee. September 15, 2018. Paulina found Rick unconscious in his home recording studio. Despite frantic efforts to revive him, he was pronounced dead at the scene. At 75, the rock legend was gone, leaving Paulina not just grieving but facing an uncertain future. The initial shock of widowhood was devastating enough, but what came next was even more brutal. When Rick's will was read, Paulina discovered something that shattered her understanding of her marriage and her future. She had been deliberately excluded from his estate, receiving nothing despite nearly 30 years of marriage. The legal reasoning was technical, but cruel. Rick had filed for divorce shortly before his death, though he'd never told Paulina or followed through with the proceedings. This technical separation meant that under New York law, she had no claim to his estate. Everything went to his sons from previous relationships. Suddenly, the woman who'd lived in luxury for decades was facing homelessness. The houses, the bank accounts, the investments, none of it was hers. At 54, Paulina found herself with no home, limited resources, and no clear path forward. The humiliation was public and complete. Media outlets covered her financial struggles with a mixture of sympathy and sensationalism. The supermodel who'd once commanded millions was now fighting for basic survival, and everyone was watching. But perhaps the cruelest blow was the ageism she encountered when trying to rebuild her career. The fashion industry that had once celebrated her now saw her as irrelevant. At 54, she was considered too old for most modeling work, despite being more beautiful than many women half her age. Casting directors who'd once competed for her attention now barely returned her calls. The industry that had built fortunes on her image had moved on to younger faces, treating her decades of experience as worthless rather than valuable. Social media became her lifeline and her weapon. Instead of hiding her struggles, Paulina began sharing them with raw honesty that shocked her followers. She posted makeup-free photos, wrote about financial anxiety, discussed the reality of starting over in her 50s. The response was overwhelming. Women around the world connected with her vulnerability, seeing their own fears and struggles reflected in her story. Paulina had accidentally created something more powerful than any magazine cover: authentic connection. The truth is, Paulina's story isn't about a supermodel's fall from grace. It's about a woman who spent decades living for others. For the fashion industry, for her husband, for her children, for everyone except herself. And finally, found the courage to live authentically. The financial devastation that should have destroyed her became the catalyst for her most important transformation. Without the security of marriage, without the identity of supermodel, without any of the external validation she'd relied on, Paulina was forced to discover what remained when everything else was stripped away. What remained was stronger than anyone, including herself, had imagined. The vulnerable essays, the honest social media posts, the willingness to be imperfect in public, these weren't signs of weakness, they were acts of revolution. In a culture that expects women to disappear gracefully after 50, Paulina chose to become more visible, more vocal, more authentically herself. Her reinvention wasn't about recapturing past glory or proving she could still be beautiful. It was about proving that women's value doesn't diminish with age, that starting over is possible at any stage of life, and that authentic voice matters more than perfect image. Today, Paulina has built a new kind of success. Her writing resonates with millions of women who see their own struggles reflected in her honesty. Her advocacy for aging women has opened conversations that were long overdue. Her financial independence, hard-won through her own efforts, means more than inherited wealth ever could. Her legacy isn't the magazine covers or the modeling contracts. It's the permission she gave to an entire generation of women to age openly, to struggle publicly, to reinvent boldly, and to never apologize for taking up space in a world that would prefer they quietly disappear. The supermodel became something more valuable than beautiful. She became brave. If you enjoyed discovering Paulina Porizkova's incredible journey of reinvention and resilience, hit that subscribe button for more stories of women who turned their greatest challenges into their most powerful victories. I'll see you in the next one.